Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our 2024 Canvas monitoring training. We're going to get started with some brief introductions. But real quickly, just want to share today's training is about nonpartisan election protection and the important role monitoring and the county canvas or the vote counting process plays in our election protection work every election year. To briefly introduce ourselves, if you haven't yet, put your name in the chat. Let us know where you're joining from. Let us know if you've monitored Canvas before or if this is your first time. We're thrilled to see you and we appreciate you making the time to be here. My name is Ann Webb. I'm the Policy Director with Common Cause North Carolina, and I am joined today by my colleagues, Tyler Day and Jane Pinsky. We are thrilled to be hosting tonight's training with our friends Keith Chappell and Carol Moreno from Democracy North Carolina and Caitlin Kaiser from Southern Coalition for Social Justice. You'll be hearing from all of us shortly. Before we dive in, I want to let folks know that tonight's training is being recorded. Zoom might have told you as much. And all the resources that we are sharing tonight, including the slides, and an on-demand training that Democracy North Carolina previously recorded, will be shared with you after the training by email. So sit back, relax, know that you will get everything you need in writing, and we'll share more about those resources. This is your chance to listen, ask questions, and we appreciate you being here. And make sure you get that bite to eat. I'm sure everyone's hungry for dinner. We will have time at the end for Q&A, as well as we have folks monitoring the chat. So please do feel free to either use the chat or the Q&A feature to put any questions that you have in, and we will reserve some time at the end for folks' questions. Quick reminder also that tonight is a nonpartisan training, and we ask folks to keep it nonpartisan. That means in the chat and in your questions and comments, and we appreciate all the work that folks are doing in the partisan space, but that is not what we're doing here tonight. So what are we going to do? Tonight, our agenda is three main things to help us learn from the lessons of 2023 and help us prepare for the realities of 2024. We're going to cover three main things. First, why are we monitoring County Board of Elections, or CBOEs, as you'll hear us call them? I see from the chat that some folks are new to this. I also see faces that I know have been doing this for a while. And so we'll start from the very beginning. Why are we doing this? Then we're going to talk about what happens during Canvas and what we call pre-Canvas meetings, and what to be looking for, and what your role will be as Canvas monitor. And then lastly, we'll wrap up with how you can join this effort and some really important next steps to get you on your way. Canvas monitoring is an opportunity to witness one of the most important aspects of our elections, to build local relationships, accountability, and community empowerment, flag local election problems, concerns, or challenges, and help advocates, that means those of us presenting today, achieve better election policies in the short and long term. Some of you may have participated in Canvas monitoring before. For others, this is your first time. There have been several, as many folks know, several election law changes which will affect this year's Canvas in comparison to years past. So our goal here tonight is to prepare you for everything you need to know, whether this is a refresher or your first time. And there is no better person to introduce us to the role of the CBOE than our very own Tyler Day.
Thanks, Ann. I'm Tyler Day, the Policy and Civic Engagement Manager with Common Cause NC. So each county boards of elections are responsible for administering elections in their county. County boards have many duties, as you can see here. Those include certifying the election results for that county, reviewing absentee and provisional ballots, hearing voter and candidate challenges, overseeing recounts and election protests, appointing precinct election officials, and choosing early voting sites, among many others. These boards play a critical role in the elections process. Appointed county boards are currently made up of 5 members. This includes 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans, recommended by the state Democratic and Republican Party chairs and appointed by the State Board of Elections. Each governor appoints the chair of each county board. Because the governor is a Democrat, we can expect that most of the board chairs are going to be Democrats. Each board hires a county director of elections who runs the office, manages the staff, and operates the election. And as you can see, these responsibilities involve year-round work to make important decisions affecting our elections. Before we get into more detail about what you'll see when monitoring the ballot review and election certification process, I'll give you a quick overview of what our County Board of Elections engagement work will look like throughout the remainder of 2024. So in March, county boards of elections will hold canvass and pre-canvass meetings for the primary election, which is set to be canvassed on March 15th. After the primary election, the county boards of elections will shift their focus to finalizing their budgets for the remainder of 2024 and planning their early voting and election day sites for the general election. Note that some counties may have to run a second primary in May. This means that from late March through early August, our focus will also shift to encouraging county commissions to fully fund election budgets, because remember, county commissions fund the county boards of elections, which will in large part determine how many early voting sites and election day sites, as well as paid staff, the county board can provide for the November general election. New county budgets go into effect on July 1st, and we expect many public hearings to take place in May and June. Over the spring and summer, county boards will decide on their early voting plans for the general election. The placement and number of early voting locations can have a significant impact on how easy and accessible it is to vote. Sites on or near college campuses and close to public transit are vital for those with less access to transportation. Counties may begin discussing early voting plans for the general elections after, as soon as after the primary elections, and are expected to submit their early voting plans by early August. The next critical time period is during and after the November 5th general election. Prior to Election Day, there will be weekly absentee ballot review meetings where the county boards review mail-in ballots. And just like for the primary, there will be a canvass and there will be pre-canvass meetings in the 10 days after Election Day. So as you can see, county elections work isn't just happening on Election Day. It's a year-round job, and so are monitoring county boards of elections. And so are the volunteer opportunities, I should say. In addition to monitoring the county boards of elections meetings to tally votes, members of our CBOE monitor teams may choose to attend monthly county board of elections meetings, budget meetings of the county commission, and critical early voting plan discussions. This teamwork allows community members to engage directly with their board members about important decisions and lets advocacy groups like ours know when there are problems or other developments. That means there's always work to do, and it's never too late to join us in this work. Now let's focus on what's coming up in just the next few days, the county canvass. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to my good friend Keith with Democracy North Carolina. Keith, could you tell us what the Day of Canvass is in North Carolina, who leads it, and why it is so important?
Yep. Thank you, Tyler. And I just got to say, it's good to see everybody here. I just popped at the participants, and nice to see over 120 people tonight. Like Tyler said, I'm Keith Chappelle. I'm the program associate on the policy team at Democracy North Carolina. So most people believe elections are decided on election night, but to actually certify every election with confidence, there is an election canvass. The post-election county canvass process occurs after every election in all 100 counties across North Carolina. The canvass is so important because it includes the entire process of ensuring all of our votes have been counted correctly and required audits have been completed, culminating in the certification of election results. All of this takes place during meetings held at each county board of elections. The day of canvass, then, is when your county board of elections, including the 5-member board members, assisted by the elections director and staff, finally compile election results from all precincts and officially report the outcome of the election within the county. The board, by law, meets at 11 a.m. on the 10th day after every election held. So to make that easier to understand, this year, that day of canvass will be on March 15th. So to complete the canvass of votes cast and authenticate the count in every ballot type by determining that votes have been counted correctly. And in most cases, the canvass meeting is held at the County Board of Elections office. Most county board of elections also hold public board meetings before the day of canvass as they begin to process and count mail-in, absentee, and provisional ballots. These pre-canvass meetings are expected to happen during the period between election day and day of canvass. So between March 6th through Friday, March 15th. Many counties have scheduled these pre-canvass meetings on March 5th through 8th and Thursday, March 14th. In counties which do hold pre-canvass meetings, they often will make the most important, sometimes contentious decisions during these meetings. In past election cycles, many of the canvass issues emerged during these pre-canvass meetings, and while different from county to county, they remain some of the most important parts of the process to monitor. We hope you will consider attending as many of these meetings as you can, in addition to the final day of canvass. And following the county canvass, the 5-member state board of elections, assisted by the state board of elections director and staff, approves the official elections results. These results are then submitted to the state board of elections, which holds its own canvass meeting and certifies the statewide election results once all counties' results have been submitted. So, if you've never been before, what can you expect? Well, what pre-canvass or day of canvass meetings look like depend on the county. Many smaller counties host these meetings in a conference room within the County Board of Elections office. However, in Wake County, the largest county in the state, it's historically taken place in a big warehouse. While the settings can be different, attendees to these public meetings are often similar. So here's who you will typically see. The appointed County Board of Elections chair, who generally leads the meeting, and they are joined by 4 board members. So right now, as Tyler mentioned, that's 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and the chair who is appointed by the governor. You'll also see a County Board of Elections director and likely members of their staff assisting throughout the process. Also, any member of the public who wishes to witness the vote count is allowed to do so. So you might see voters who are interested in being heard on their disputed or challenged ballots, partisan observers, potentially from various local, state, and or federal campaigns, attorneys who may be representing voters, groups, or campaigns, other advocacy groups who are observing the proceedings based on the interests they serve. And then also members of the media who are reporting on elections results. So there should be seats for public to watch the proceedings, which will feature the board chair, board members, and election director. And they will likely be seated in front of the room where election officials can examine and pass along ballots and ask questions, and make determinations within public view, while also maintaining the privacy of voters' ballots. In smaller counties, these meetings may take place in small conference rooms, so don't be surprised if you're squeezed into a corner, but don't let that deter you because it's so important to be at these meetings. So now you know what the canvass is, when it happens, and who participates in it. I'm going to pass it over to an experienced canvass monitor, Jane Penske with Common Cause, to talk about the most important part of this training. What should you do before, during, and after monitoring a Canvas meeting. Shane?
Thank you, Keith. And I would bet your experience is better than mine, but I'm going to walk everyone through a few do's and don'ts for monitoring a Canvas meeting. Before the meeting, Canvas monitors should call their assigned county boards to determine the dates and locations for pre-Canvas and day of Canvas meetings. Dates and agendas may be listed on the county CBOE's website, but to be safe, you may want to confirm it with a call. Just to be sure, you may also want to call the day of the Canvas because sometimes things get changed at the last moment. And that means that you're not making a trip for nothing or missing a meeting. You can find your CBOE's phone number by county at ccnc.me/your BOE. Now, you don't need to write that down because, as everybody said, you'll get that information in an email later. So once you know where the meetings are and when they are, what should you do? Arrive early to get a seat just in case it's crowded, and introduce yourself to any of the members of the county staff and ask how you're going to be able to ask questions, or any other member of the public can ask questions if there's a need. It's an important opportunity to build a relationship with people who make critical elections policy and decisions for your county. Remember, they're your employees and you have a right to be there. That's very important. During the meeting, take detailed notes. We strongly recommend taking them on a tablet or laptop to type notes and avoid handwriting issues. Don't forget, you have to be nonpartisan all of the time. Don't wear political tees, political buttons. Don't speak about specific candidates. In between breaks in the process, feel free to politely approach CBOE members and staff with any questions or confusions you may have about the process. It can be a really confusing process the first time you see it, especially if you're having trouble hearing or as there's discussion continuing from a previous meeting. Please ask questions about it. And if you can't hear, ask them to speak up. Grab any documentation that's available to the public. That might be an agenda, the number of ballots they'll be reviewing. Call the nonpartisan election hotline, the number that's on your screen, 888-OUR-VOTE, right away if you witness certain procedures or have questions, especially if someone else is there to take notes. Something just doesn't seem right to you, feel free to call the hotline. In fact, we encourage you to do. If there's a break during the meeting, that's another time when you can call the hotline if you have questions about something that has been said or done. Note that calling the hotline can be very useful to the work of all of the election protection organizations who monitor concerns raised by voters and volunteers. After the meeting, call the hotline again, 888-OUR-VOTE, to report any problems if you haven't been able to do that during the meeting. Submit your Canvas report from the same form the same day, and scan or take pictures of any handouts and submit those as well. Now for a few don'ts. They're pretty simple. Don't interfere with the Canvas or be disruptive. Touch a ballot, photograph or handle any election materials, particularly ballots. Display or wear any political or partisan paraphernalia. Engage with or challenge any disruptive individuals. That's a moment when being quiet is the best route to go. Don't rely on recordings or video rather than taking notes. So now that you know the do's and don'ts of Canvas Day, I'm going to ask Caitlin Kaiser from the Southern Coalition for Social Justice to walk us through the next step. Caitlin, it's all you.
Thanks so much, Jane. That was really helpful information. And as someone who has been in the Canvas world in North Carolina since 2020, I think it's always really helpful to have those reminders of, what we are here to do. And that's really to, watch, observe, document, and listen to what's going on. And so, as Jane said, my name is Caitlin Kaiser. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm an attorney with the Southern Coalition for Social Justice. And so during my time with you all tonight, I'm going to walk us through some important issues and things to look out for during any Canvas meeting, whether you're attending the pre-Canvas, meetings that happen after Election Day or the day of canvass, especially because in North Carolina, election laws have changed in the past years. So even if you've monitored with us before, there are a number of things that are maybe new to you in 2024. So remember, you do not need to be an expert in election law. I'm going to go over quite a few different topics that are law related, but the important thing is to trust your gut, take good notes, and just do your best to document everything that you hear and see. And if you know that you are going to be, attending a Canvas meeting with people you do know, try to develop some sort of buddy system. If you want to say like, I'm going to take the numbers, and if you take, the reasons why. So that's another reason, another way of, going through Canvas. So to start tonight, the most common ballot issues typically relate to absentee ballots, so mail-in ballots and provisional ballots. For mail-in absentee voting discussions, the board is going to be examining issues with the absentee ballot envelope, whether or not late ballots have arrived after Election Day, and unique situations that might be similar to certain gaps in the law where the board where the staff need to research the issue before providing the board with some guidance. So important, these ballots, so absentee ballots, need to meet certain requirements underneath the law. They have to be submitted in the proper envelope with 2 witness signatures or a notary signature, and as well as the voter signature, and importantly, voter photo ID. So for mail-in ballots, the voter has the option to photocopy that or use an ID exception form. Another change, a change that has happened in 2024 is this year, mail-in absentee ballots are due to the County Board of Elections by 7:30 on Election Day itself. Previously, so thinking about 2023 past years, there used to be a 3-day grace period after Election Day. That is no longer the law. Important to remember, another distinction is this deadline does not apply to military or overseas voters. You might hear that in your, as you are monitoring Canvas as Uva Kappa voters. Another thing talking about absentee ballots is, once absentee ballots are received by the deadline, there are certain ballots that are able to have deficiencies that may be cured before the day of canvass. You might hear this as the absentee ballot cure process. That's a common way that the board members and the board director or the staff will present these sorts of ballots. We know based off of the data that we are able to analyze, as well as all of your reports, that the majority of absentee ballots are rejected due to a missing voter or witness signature received after the cure deadline has passed. Other problems you may hear or witness may include ballots arrived after 7:30 on Election Day. Again, missing witnesses, so there are no witnesses at all on the envelope. The ballot is returned by someone who's not eligible to return the ballot. Failure to include a photocopy of ID or a properly completed photo ID form, as well as, maybe potentially we see a lot of the times families with the same names or some sort of ballot swap. So that's a really common issue that you might reckon that if you've been with us before and monitored, you might have recognized. These types of problems are assessed during, pre-election and pre-canvass meetings, and the counts are finalized at the day of canvass, as Keith, had just previously walked us through. So you'll see the staff, like the director, present and explain the issue to the board members. For example, we have 10 ballots that were returned after Election Day, and these ballots should not be counted because they did not were not received at 7:30 p.m. on Election Day. So you might hear the staff or director present a group of ballots like that. Another category that I mentioned in the beginning is provisional ballots. So a voter receives a provisional ballot when questions arise about their qualifications to vote or their eligibility to vote. We typically see provisional ballots related to voter registration, and now when a person votes without a voter photo ID. This means that when you are talking about provisional ballots, The staff is required to present to the board research about that voter's eligibility. And based off of that research, the board will make a final determination about that voter's eligibility and ultimately whether or not that ballot will fully count or potentially partially count or not count at all. Prior to this year, the most common provisional ballot issues were out of precinct voters, voters with no record of registration, and jurisdiction dispute among voters. What does that last category mean? I had to actually look this up myself before doing this presentation. That means if a voter presents to vote and has no eligible ballot style, or more commonly, the voter is voting out of their assigned precinct or a district. For these types of provisional ballots, it's really essential for you to document key issues such as registration. Is there issues with registration? This especially comes up if, for example, the voter had registered at the DMV but did not appear on the rolls on election day or during early voting. This happens really often. You might hear this as no record of registration or no acceptable ID. So when I say no acceptable ID, that usually is around not in particular a voter photo ID, but if a voter presents to you same-day registration and doesn't have a document that shows their proof of residency. Another category you'll hear is voter eligibility. So a voter who voted at the wrong precinct on election day, whose partial ballots should be counted. This might come under the categories of unreported move, incorrect precinct, or jurisdictional dispute. During these discussions, you will want to document what the staff board members are saying. Again, if you have a friend, if you have a buddy during Canvas with you, you want to come up maybe potentially with a plan about how you're going to document what the board is saying, because many times the board is going to go quickly over this information. And sometimes the board might not say anything at all. And so it's really great for you in the beginning of Canvas to introduce yourself to staff, introduce yourself to the board members, and ask them, can you please explain each category of ballots that you are going to go through so the public can understand what is happening. So the things that you're going to want to document are the number of ballots for each category if possible, how these issues are being dealt with. For example, was the issue attributed to a poll worker? Was the issue a voter error? How did the staff conduct the research? Did the staff conduct the vote did the staff connect with the voter? And if so, what happened? Are there any trends you are noticing or that the staff has raised? For example, student voters required to vote provisionally because they did not have proofs of residency. You're seeing large numbers of students having this issue. And I just want to provide you all with another example of things that you want to be looking out for. Did you hear staff say that all voters with no record of registration were submitted to the DMV to see if they had even registered at the DMV? That is the sort of research that you want to be noticing if the staff has done that or hasn't said anything at all. And so the next category that I'm going to discuss in our time is voter photo ID. Starting at the 2023 municipal election, voters were required to present an acceptable photo ID when presenting to vote. There is going to be many provisional ballots cast by voters who either use an ID exception form. You may hear this at Canvas as a reasonable impediment, or that they needed to return to the County Board of Elections with an acceptable ID for their vote to be counted. Because the law was quickly implemented at the end of 2023, this process is one new to voters as well as County Board of Elections, their staff, the board members, and the directors. So I'm going to go briefly over the basics of voting without a photo ID. So the first thing I said was an ID exception form. If a voter is unable to show an acceptable photo ID when presenting to vote, whether that's in person or by mail, they may vote a provisional ballot and use what's called an ID exception form. And you see this form that's on your screen. And so in the form, the voter basically has 3 buckets of exceptions for not presenting an ID. The first is what's called a reasonable impediment. And you can think about this as a reason that prevents the voter from presenting photo ID or from getting a photo ID. And common issues that we see, common reasons are lack of transportation, disability, work schedule, family responsibilities. The other two buckets are religious objections to being photographed. And then finally, we have a victim of a natural disaster within 100 days before the election day. And it is the job of the County Board of Elections to approve or disapprove these ID exception forms. So during Canvass, you will hear the staff present, the board of directors or the staff present, we have X amount of ballots with ID exception forms, and you'll see the boards, the members actually reviewing the ID exception form. They'll be reading them, they'll be seeing what's on the form, making sure that it's properly completed. And we have gained a lot of knowledge from all of you who monitored last year's municipal elections, Canvass and pre-Canvass meetings. Many boards disagreed about whether or not to count the reasons voters selected as to why they could not present ID. So long as the reason provided on the ID exception form is true and the form is properly completed, which includes the voter's signature, the county must count that ballot. Again, I really want to emphasize this because you will see board members saying, that doesn't seem right, or like, oh, why couldn't this person do X, Y, Z? They voted, they had the opportunity to vote, they should have gotten ID. But it's really important. It is not the board's job to second guess or judge the reasonableness of the voter's asserted impediment to showing photo ID. Its staff and the board should also not conduct any independent research into the truthfulness of the form. And so this is, just the general basics of proving the ID exception form. The ID exception form can really only be rejected for two reasons. And when we're rejecting the ID exception form, it has to be unanimous. So that means 5 board members voted to reject that form. If one board member says, no, I'm going to approve that form is approved. And so you're going to be looking for whether or not the form was properly completed, or there are actual factual grounds to believe the information on the form is false. And again, remember, a decision that a form is false must be based on facts, not speculation or personal opinion. That's really important to remember. A decision that a form is false must be based on facts, not speculation or personal opinion. And so, again, we expect that during the primary election, there's going to be some disagreements from board members regarding the approval of these exception forms. So what we want you to be listening for and document are, what are the board members saying? How are they reviewing these ballots? Are they saying, are they scrutinizing it? Because, for example, if the person had a driver's license but was not able to photocopy it, how are the boards making the decisions? If possible, who is saying this? It's perfectly fine if you don't get people's names. Try to write down a description of the folks in the room. Is the director providing information about the process, how board members should be determining whether or not the ID exception form is true or false? Is there any sort of reference to law, a numbered memo, state board guidance? Are board members, or do board members not agree with the state board guidance? Are board members agreeing with the state board guidance? These are certain things that you just want to keep your ear out for as you're attending these meetings. If a county board of elections rejects a voter's ID exception form for any reason, please call the North Carolina Election Protection Hotline 888 Our Vote as soon as possible. This way we can document, we can get that information to an election attorney like myself, and I can reach out to the voter. We can figure out what happened and try to make sure that for the next election we have a process and policies that voters are not harmed. And then finally, remember, you do not need to be an election expert. I know this is a lot of information. Maybe some of you are hearing this for the first time. But again, a Canvass monitor's role is largely to watch and listen for whatever comes up and document as much as possible so that people like myself, other people who are in this room, my colleagues, can assess if there were any problems in this process and use this data for advocacy to fix the process and policies that work for voters. I'm going to just reiterate some of the things that my colleagues have already said. The most important basics are when you are in Canvas is to identify as best as possible who is in the room, jotting down overall numbers, absentee and provisional ballot totals, any statutes mentioned, names of voters, or people who are or potential challenges, or reasoning behind the decisions of who made them. Is it a poll worker error, for example, a voter error? And I also want to reiterate that if you missed anything, during the Canvas process, you can always approach staff at the end of Canvas and ask them for that information again. That is not a problem, and they will typically 9 out of 10 times will be more than happy to give you that information and that you are a part of this process and that you showed up to monitor Canvas. Just briefly, just some other issues to touch on that you might see during your Canvas is voter challenges or hearings. These typically happen during the day of Canvas, so that March 15th day. A voter challenge is when a voter's right to register, remain registered, or vote is challenged. We typically should not be seeing voter challenges based off of registration, but sometimes they happen. And so we want to keep in mind that the burden of proof is on the challenger, so the person who is challenging that voter's registration, but depending on the situations, the voter might also be there and have the opportunity to prove proof of residency or eligibility. Please make a note of whether voters were challenged, including their names, and whether or not the board sustained that challenge. Another topic category are election protests. Those will also be on the day of Canvas. These are usually occur when there is some sort of irregularity affecting the outcome of an election. So you're going to think it's usually associated with there was something that made something that casts some sort of doubt on the election results due either to the way that the votes were counted or a violation of the election law. Typically, these are brought by candidates. So if you go back to 2020, when we have Chief Justice Beasley or previous Chief Justice Beasley and now Chief Justice Newby's election race, that race was a difference of 401 votes. There were election protests that occurred because of from both candidates because of the way that the votes were counted. And then finally, we have some issues with same-day registration, listening to see if there were any same-day registration ballots being challenged or denied. If so, how many? Was there any discussion of mail verifications? When I say mail verifications, you want to think about the voter registration cards being sent to that voter and then those mailings being returned as undeliverable. You want to think about any sort of damaged ballots. And then finally, any issues with voting machines or tabulator issues. So keep your ears out for tabulator, e-poll books, or ballot marking devices. Again, I know this was a lot of information, but in addition to these slides and a handbook that we'll share with you at the end of this call, there is also going to be that 888-hour vote hotline available for you to hear, available for you if you hear something concerning or confusing at the board. It might be me or Carol's, one of us answering the line. And so you now know our faces. Please call this line. And I think especially if you are voting during this election outside of Canvas monitoring, you see something, please call us. I'm going to turn it back over to Anne. And Anne, can you tell us when a monitor should call the hotline?
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Caitlin, for covering that deep dive. And I hope everyone is taking a deep breath and remembering what Caitlin said. You do not need to be an expert. We want to share this deep dive with you so that you can be familiar with some of the vocabulary and some of the scenarios that you might see. It makes it easier to take notes and pay attention and follow along. But you are not expected to understand every single thing that's happening in a meeting in order to be a huge help to this effort. I'm just going to very briefly, folks can read this slide themselves, but just very briefly share that escalating an issue by calling the hotline is incredibly helpful. We use the data from the calls to the hotline for all kinds of analysis after the election, as well as immediate intervention if that's appropriate and feasible. And so we absolutely appreciate phone calls. You're also going to be making reports in writing. So we'll get the information in multiple ways, but if there are contentious voter challenges, that may require a quicker response. If there are county boards that are going into closed session without explaining why and seem to be doing all their business behind closed doors, that's something to call about. Incidents of intimidation that are being reported or discussed or that you witness. Folks who are denied access to the Canvas meeting, that's a huge one to call about. That includes virtual meetings if you can't hear or see. If there are incidents of mis or disinformation being documented in your county, being discussed at the board meeting, perhaps even being said at the board meeting. And if there are impacted voters who show up to be heard, we encourage folks to call the hotline, let folks know what happened to that voter, if you got a name or an email or a phone number, or if the voter themselves would like a call. And then definitely, please call us about any voter ID exception forms that are rejected. This is a new area that we're trying to understand. And there's been a fair bit of inconsistency across the counties. And so these calls help us to encourage counties to be consistent across the state so that voters are not disenfranchised. So you may be wondering, what's going to happen to all this information? We're asking you to send it, we're asking you to call, we're asking you to submit report forms. Is anyone going to read it? Well, Tyler is going to read it, and he can tell you more about what we do with your information.
Thank you, Anne. So when you provide your observations as soon as possible, beginning on or before the day of Canvas, and on the day of Canvas as well, your immediate reporting will help our coalition of election experts. Our 3 organizations, along with the League of Women Voters, share our reports regularly and collaborate on how to respond. With your reports, we can identify problems with the process and in almost real time, identify the numbers and types of voters who have been impacted, and advocate for better election policies and voting access, including meaningful litigation and legislation that can help make a difference for one voter or all voters going into the important elections ahead. So I do want to, I should say in the 2022 cycle, the Canvas program was vital to identifying ballots that were being discarded due to ineligible postmarks across several counties. This proved that even after the pandemic, mail delays continued to be an issue when voting by mail. And I do want to point out an example of what we were able to do with a report from Surry County. And I want to stress what you see here on the slide and what I'm going to talk about. We only know because we had someone monitoring the Canvas there. So in Surry County, the monitoring of the county Canvas meetings in 2022 and 2023 led to the identification of 2 Board of Elections members that refused to certify the election on the day of Canvas because they did not agree with the current law, violating their oath and responsibilities as County Board of Elections members. In a letter presented to the Surry County Board of Elections on the day of Canvas, the members acknowledged that the elections in Surry County were conducted in full compliance with applicable laws per the North Carolina State Board of Elections. However, they explained that they didn't view election laws administered by the North Carolina State Board of Elections as legitimate or constitutional, and declined to certify the election results as credible. There was a complaint filed against these 2 board members, and ultimately the board members' actions resulted in their removal from the County Board of Elections in March of last year. And I do want to point out that vote was unanimous and bipartisan by the State Board of Elections. So just one example of the result of reports, and we wouldn't have known anything that was going on at that Canvas meeting if we hadn't been monitoring it. So that's really important. I also want to talk about this County Board of Elections report that was just released. So we also use your reports to track trends and communicate about those issues to election officials and the public. And this earlier this year, Democracy North Carolina, Common Cause, the League of Women Voters of North Carolina, and the Southern Coalition for Social Justice released a report on the administration of the 2023 municipal elections. And a lot of this is based upon the reports that you all sent in during the Canvas in 2023. So this report shows how County Board of Elections across the state implemented the new photo ID law. It is part of the reason why we know some of what to look out for, which Caitlin was explaining earlier. This report includes observations about mail-in voting and the need for better elections funding. And again, it was made possible because of the work of dedicated, diligent volunteers who monitored county boards all over the state. So as a result, we were able to notify the State Board of Elections of many of the issues that came up. And you can see a link to that report on your screen if you'd like to take a closer look at it. So now I would like to invite one of our dedicated County Board of Elections monitors, Claire Stone, to join us to talk about her experience in monitoring the County Board of Elections. Thank you so much, Claire, for joining us. I just want to ask you first, what made you want to volunteer to monitor county boards of elections?
Hello, and thanks for letting me speak here. Well, I think that we've tried different things to volunteer, and I think the best thing about this is that there are tangible results that you were all just talking about. It's harder to see that sometimes when I'm canvassing or when I'm at a table. But this is something that articles were in the press. There were policy changes based on observer reports from around the state. So that's really powerful. And also, I just feel like we're standing up for voters. We're in the room so that we can see that they're getting their due process. Are they getting to vote, and are those votes counting?
Great. Absolutely. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the Guilford County Board of Elections meetings. I know you've been following those meetings, and specifically when they debated their early voting plan for the primary late last year. And I know that you highlighted some concerning things about the plan.
One thing I noticed too is that things go really rapidly, and sometimes these discussions go across meetings. So there were several discussions about this, but I know you were kind of wondering which ones were debated and fought over, and the polling places that were debated, of course, A&T, which is one of the HBCUs in North Carolina, of course, and then UNCG for young people, and then Barber Park, which is in Greensboro. It's used by many people of color. But that was a fight, and there were over 30 students that came to one of those meetings.
Yes, and I want to point out that thanks to Claire's reporting about those County Board of Elections meetings, we were able to notify students at North Carolina A&T. As you said, there were 40 students from what I was told that showed up at that County Board of Elections meeting. We were also able to notify partners about that, and ultimately those two sites, or three sites, I should say, UNCG, A&T, and Barber Park, were added. So that was a really big win. And again, we wouldn't have known if you hadn't been there monitoring. And lastly, I wanted to ask you, I know we've been talking about voter ID exception forms. Caitlin talked a lot about that. And there was a good amount of discussion at the Guilford County Board of Elections during the 2023 municipal canvass, and even before the canvass, about exception forms. And I wondered if you could talk about what you saw.
Okay, and then probably some of the observers right now are seeing it continue into the primary, not just the uh, municipal last year,
Mhm.
but of course the exception form being an affidavit, and some of the people who sit on the boards are are attorneys. But the discussion that was held in Guilford County was already described tonight. It's more like they focused on whether or not those were good excuses, and they kind of challenged a voter essentially doubting the veracity. So if you check off that you had an issue of trying to get your ID in, either get it in your hand and or get it photocopied, they said that that could be false. And so it went back and forth between the Board of Elections members, and some were asking, what is the evidence that's supporting your challenge? But there were even hearings held. So and it's continuing that they're wondering, I think, whether or not they can try to um, take off some of those challenges, some of those reasons for not getting a voter ID.
Mm. Yes, and those hearings that they held, they held without any evidence of anything. It was just based upon, the some of the board members who wanted to question. Is that correct? Wanted to question these forms because they were judging how reasonable the reason was on the exception form.
That's correct. I've seen that even recently, but they haven't actually wanted a hearing. They haven't they haven't gone that extra step
Yeah.
now. They just say that that's not a good excuse, and then they abstain when they vote.
Mhm. Yes. Um, so, well, I think part of the reason for that is that actually, as a result of those hearings, the State Board of Elections has clarified that now 4 out of the county's 5 election board members must agree that the voter ID exception form may be false before they hold a hearing or notify a voter that, send out a letter as they did in Guilford County. So I want to thank you so much, Claire, for all the work that you are doing and for joining. And again, I just want to say for everyone, this is, I just think, a great example of the impact that you all have when you're monitoring the county board. So thank you again so much, Claire.
I thank you,
And
Tyler.
yes, and I'm going to pass it back to Keith to talk about next steps and answer your questions.
All right. Well, thank you, Tyler. We've covered a ton of information today. So I'm going to slow us down for a moment just to review the key takeaways and make sure you all know where to find the resources you need. So first, we learned why Canvas monitoring and documentation are so important to election protection. Then we learned about when we need your help, pre-Canvas and Canvas meetings between March 5th and March 15th. Finally, we learned that there are lots of things to look out for, but you don't have to be an expert because you're part of this great team. So in the follow-up email and in the chat, you'll find some links to a Canvas toolkit and a reminder of the nonpartisan hotline. And I'll just repeat the hotline. You'll have the toolkit link, but remember, it's 888 our vote. That's 888-687-8683. So are you ready to join the team? You can fill out this sign up form right now. I'll give you about 1 to 2 minutes to do that. And then I'll pass it over to my colleague, Carol, to talk about some of the questions that came through the chat. And let me make sure that this link is popping up for you all. There we go. So be sure to click that link. We're going to take about 1 to 2 minutes for you all to sign up to be a Canvas monitor. And I just want to highlight at the moment that if you're not sure what dates will work for you, that's not a problem. You can go ahead and complete that. And then we'll follow up with you about any questions or if you have any issues with availability. And you can only do certain days that don't reflect what you put on the sign up form. That's okay too. What's important for us is to see you in here, and we're going to follow up. Tyler and I will make sure that you get your county and county assignment on here. And I was joking with Ann before this call because I used to work with educators, and we would do surveys after each professional development session. And we would literally stare at the teachers and make them wait until we knew that we reached a certain percentage of people to complete the survey. I won't do that to you here, but be warned, in the future, I might pull that trick out of my back pocket. And I see we got some signups coming in. So thank you all. Oh, and you didn't hit the link quick enough. Sorry about that. Thank you for putting that in. I just put it back in the chat for you, and I can enter it in again. And this will be in the follow-up email, but definitely take time to complete it now. Probably give us about 30 more seconds before I pass it over to Carol. Okie dokie. Another educator trick is sitting in silence, but I won't do that to you too long. Carol, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about some of the questions that have come through. And I know we're running a little short on time, so if you have questions, please put those either in the Q&A or chat. We're going to pull the text from this training and create an FAQ and send that back to everybody. So make sure that your questions get answered. But Carol, I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Keith. And we had a lot of great questions tonight. So we're going to try to move through these quickly, but please know that we will get back to folks who we might not be able to answer a question for tonight. So earlier tonight, we had a question on, are meetings open to all? They are. So these are public meetings. You do have a right to attend. As we shared in the training, we encourage folks to show up early because we know that sometimes these meeting spaces are really small and there could be other observers on that site that might also want to be monitoring. And so we encourage you to get there as early as possible. Another question, are board members paid? Tyler did address this in a section. They do receive a stipend of some kind. And if anyone wants more information about that, we're happy to talk to folks and share our knowledge. Keith actually hosts a monthly check-in for our monitors, so you're able to ask those questions in those spaces. Another question, can we speak during meetings? So we covered this a little bit. We want you to touch base with your county board of election officials or whoever's leading that meeting at the beginning to ask how public comment will be provided. This can change depending on what county you're in. So some counties might do it at the very beginning, some might do it at the end, some might allow it to happen throughout. I think someone made a really great comment in the chat that there are folks out there that can be really disruptive in these meetings, and we don't want to be a part of that problem. So we really want to ensure that however you are able to ask questions, that you are following whatever guidance that Board of Elections official is giving you within that meeting. And if they have stated that questions are welcomed, then please do ask questions in whatever format they provide. Exception forms. So someone was asking about the voter ID exception forms. If the ballot is completed correctly, will the ballot be counted? Is there any debate about whether the reason provided is legitimate? So we touched on this a little bit as well. But the county board election officials are making a determination of whether the voter was being truthful in completing the form, not whether the reason they provided was reasonable. And so that means if you're seeing any board members discussing whether lack of transportation was a good enough reason, or whether the voter was being honest that their ID was in the mail and still hadn't gotten to them, that shouldn't be happening. You should be taking as many detailed notes about that and hopefully calling into the hotline. And I put this in the chat. Sometimes we know that it's really difficult to get out of those meetings if you're not really feeling certain about something to call the hotline. We want you to be doing it as much as you possibly can, but if that does happen, we will be sharing our contact information after this training, so you have other methods of reaching out to us. And I'll say we're all pretty connected, even though we're across different organizations. And then when to submit public comment, we did touch base on that a little bit. I was seeing a question in the chat here from someone about whether, like, how to select the organization. So if whichever organization you heard about this training from, you're welcome to select that. And we'll follow up with you and on proper guidance moving forward. And then there was a question about assignment process. So do we assign you a county board meeting to attend? You'll notice in the form, as Keith was touching base on this, that we do have a priority county list of places where we could really use folks. If you're willing to travel, we have a lot of folks that aren't capable of traveling, but if you are someone that you're willing to go a little bit further, please select one of those counties. If you're only able to monitor within your county, then you will select that, and we may be reaching out to you to assign you to a county if you're indicating in that form that you are willing to travel as well. And I think that was a lot of our questions. We did get a great question about data. I'll be putting in my email in the chat around for anyone that's wondering about like what kind of voter data is out there. And I'll also just plug that we also will be reaching out to provisional voters through a phone bank. So if you're interested in that, we'll drop that opportunity. Passing it back to you, Keith. And I see a lot more great questions, but we will follow up with them.
Yep, thank you. And before I pass it back to you, Anne, to close this out, I just want to say I am seeing a lot of signups coming through. So I was looking at it, but I do want to brag on people, but I don't want to single you out. But thank you. I appreciate it for you signing up already. But anyways, Anne, I'll turn it back to you.
All right. I want to thank everyone for your time and attention this hour. It's amazing to see your faces here. This program absolutely helps the voters of North Carolina immensely. And we really could not do this work without you. And so we are grateful that you're here. Sign up, sign up, sign up. You will hear from us soon because there will be pre-Canvas meetings starting as early as the middle of next week. And so we'll be looking for folks to support us next week and the week after and throughout the rest of the year. And so appreciate you getting that form in. Look for the follow-up email. You'll have another chance to submit your sign-up form. And then you'll hear from us very soon. And we very much appreciate your time and energy to make this democracy a beautiful thing. So look out for emails from Tyler Day, from Keith Chappell, and reach out with your questions any old time. We appreciate you.